Hello friends, this is Dr. Scott Hagan and welcome to the 5-Minute Leadership Class. I want to talk with you for just a few moments today about the significance of time, but not your traditional pep talk on time management. I want to give you a new way to look at time, a new way to define time. I tell leaders all the time, half our life is a result of good planning. The other half of our life, we never see coming. The good in our life is a result of good intentional planning and strategy. But I would say the other half of our life, as I look back at my own life, was a result of things I never saw coming that day I woke up. They just appeared. How do we capture things that are significant and meaningful in time? The key is to understand what time is all about. You know, the Greeks had two ways to look at time. They would define time the first way in a way that you will recognize. It's the word Chronos. And it really means segmented time, the clock and the calendar. It's about the stewardship of our day. We have to be faithful with Chronos. It's the word we get for chronology and chronicle. It's a story of our life. On a boat, there's a chronometer that keeps its bearings so it's not lost at sea. We have to be faithful with Chronos in this life. But if we want to capture the half of life that we never see coming, we have to understand the other way that the Greeks define time. And there was another word that meant to understand what season and opportunity was all about. Even the pagans understood this with the idea of chance or fate. And it's a word for Kairos. Chronos means what time is it, but Kairos means what is it time for. Leaders have to understand what it's time for that given day while also being faithful to what time it is. You know, the Apostle Paul, he answered one of the great questions of leadership. Who am I becoming? You can see it in the chronology, the chronicle of Paul's own life as a writer. When he was a young minister out in the itinerant world, going from city to city, he wrote his very first letter, the book of Galatians. And he introduced himself as I, Paul, the apostle. Very powerful term, a term of clout, strength, vitality, I, Paul, the apostle. 7 years later, when he writes to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 9, he calls himself least of the apostles. What happened during those 7 years? Then 7 years later, he writes to the church at Ephesus, and in chapter 3, verse 8, he says he's I, Paul, the least of the saints. He went from I, Paul, the apostle, least in the apostle, to least among saints. And then the apostle Paul pens the famous words in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, 3 years after he wrote to the church at Ephesus, 17 years after he wrote his first letter. He says, I, Paul, chief among sinners. See, the Apostle Paul knew who he had become and was becoming because he understood Kairos. He was faithful with the segmented times of his life. He knew what the clock and the calendar was all about. But the Apostle Paul also understood what the Lord was doing and forming in his life, who he was becoming. He knew what it was time for, not simply what time it was. I want to encourage you in your leadership life. Be faithful with Chronos. You've got to be faithful with the clock and the calendar. You've got to be faithful with the segmented times of our life. Our story, our chronology, our chronicle of our life, it has to be told in a way that honors the Lord. People need to be able to count on us from day to day. They need to know that we take the clock and the calendar seriously. But we also have to be leaders of Kairos. We have to understand season and opportunity that present themselves to us. Things that we woke up that morning not knowing was going to be brought before us. Things that we never knew existed in the kingdom realm until the day that we awaken. It's that Kairos bent, it's that Kairos ear in our life. The ability to see and to hear what it's time for, not simply what time it is. I pray for you as leaders today that you would be faithful with Chronos and you would be equally as faithful with Kairos, because it's not simply what time is it, it's more importantly, what is it time for? God bless you.